If you haven't been able to tell by now, there is no offseason in college football anymore. Transfer portal, we can either thank you or we can blame you. I don't know which one. Depends on whether you want more college football news or you want to take a break. But we take no breaks here at the Voice of College Football, it appears. And so we will have transfer portal scuttlebutt that's around in regards to players available for OU, possibly some commits and the NFL draft and a college football playoff schedule that OU fans certainly you hope that Oklahoma is going to take part in starting in 2024 right here at Sooners Live. We're here every week for you right here at the Voice of College Football, Boomer Sooner, and of course the guy that makes it all work for us each and every week, Jason Ray. Jason, what's going on today?
Oh, not a whole lot. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing just fine. Appreciate you being here. And how's that softball team looking?
Good. They actually have they have their last series of the regular season coming up this weekend, which is Bedlam. Oklahoma State's taken a little bit of a skid, but they're still ranked in the top 10 in the country, so it'll be a good test. I think they beat Tulsa here last night, so 46-1, I believe, is their record at this point right now. So they're in a good spot. They're looking to become only the second team in NCAA history to win back-to-back national championships this year. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, no, everything's they're playing really, really well right now.
46-1. Yeah, that will work in any sport. Wow. Not necessarily top 10 rated, but not too far off. Getting back to football, 2024 commit wide receiver Zion Kearney out of Missouri City, Texas, 6'2", 200, and highly ranked as 12th in his state and 12th rated wide receiver in the country, according to 247 Sports.
Yeah, Mark, we talked a little bit about him last week on the show before we exited. Thought he could potentially be one of the next dominoes to fall in terms of this recruiting class, and it didn't happen too long after that. I think he announced his commitment on Thursday of last week, and as you mentioned, 6'2", 200 out of Missouri City, Texas, number 12 wide receiver in the country, I believe, number 63 overall. You mentioned his stats last week: 39 catches, 765 yards, 8 touchdowns a year ago. He's another guy that's probably has an opportunity in the mold that Levy and then now Emmett Jones likes from a wide receiver perspective. A little bit of a taller kid, has the ability to kind of take the top off the defense in the back end. So I think right around 20 yards per reception last year. Kind of watching some of his video and things like that. Looks really, really good. So. Mark, the guys that typically have a chance to kind of go from a 4 to a 5-star, when you look at number 63 overall, he does have that opportunity. Typically, you're going to see skill position players and defensive linemen be the type that have that opportunity to kind of elevate throughout the season. So we'll see if he's able to do that. But really good get for Oklahoma. Like, they're going to still, and we'll talk about this from a transfer portal perspective as well. I think there's going to be some. I think the recruiting from a wide receiver perspective, Emmett Jones has already did just a wonderful job. Just in the early on. From a recruiting perspective, and I think he'll continue to kind of pay dividends from that side of things. So yeah, very, very good. Good get for Oklahoma here in the 24 cycle. That I think gets them up to 25 overall. And I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Mark, but I think that got that commitment, which was the 6th one in the 24 class, got them. They're right on the edge of that top 25 right now.
And that's about where they were roughly. I'm being very rough here, just making the point that if you go back 1 year, of course, there wasn't a whole lot of optimism concerning the class or a lot of great results concerning the class, a number of commits, but them very much heavily being in the 3-star category up until right about this time, late May, June. they kicked it in and they really raised the ante for the rest of the class and finished with a top 5 class in the country. So we'll see if history repeats itself. We've got another wide receiver, but this from the 2025 class with Grayson Harris, 5'10", 170. And they always or also have a rating already on him as a top 200 player, Jason.
Yeah, I kind of temper the discussion on 25 kids, 2 years, because there's so much that can change. But he seemed very, very solid on his commitment. He's a guy that Emmett Jones has been had targeted even previously at Tech. So yeah, he joins Kevin Sperry as the second commitment in the 25 cycle for Oklahoma. As you mentioned, 5'10", 170, top 25 wide receiver in the country as a 4-star, and certainly that will make a lot of changes in a lot of waves between now and when that happens. But yeah, another good get, as we mentioned, with Emmett Jones and what he's been able to do. The one thing that I'll mention, kind of going back to the 24 cycle, we talked a little bit about this on some guys to look out for, and there has been several. There's a lot of smoke, and there's a lot of I would say there's a lot of predictions around a trio of defensive linemen for Oklahoma that are that really, really very highly rated. David Stone, I've heard he might end up actually committing well before we anticipate. Tons of crystal balls over the last week or so. A couple of even flips from Texas A&M commitment to Oklahoma. We talk about Williams Nwaneri. He's another guy. Both of those are top, depending on what you look at, number 1, number 2 defensive lineman in the country. Nigel Smith is another one. So those are the ones to keep your eye on. But there's a lot of positive vibes for Oklahoma right now, and all 3 of those kids. That would be just, if they could get all 3 of those guys, just a absolutely phenomenal defensive line recruiting class. And if they can get 2 of the 3 still, I think that will be very, very good. So anyway, something to keep your eye on, but there's a lot of good momentum with those 3 kids.
As just a freshman and sophomore, Grayson Harris, 144 receptions for 2,255 yards and 18 touchdowns, according to the Dallas Morning News. So he hit the ground running as a freshman in high school, catching a ton of passes. So he's been highly productive already, playing at a pretty high level of football. So great signs there for Grayson Harris, a 2025 commit. Most of us are on the internet pretty much all the time. It's fun. You get to socialize, you get entertained, and in this day and age, it's pretty much necessary. And even if you're one of those people that's not on the internet all the time, you know what is? Your personal information. And there are people out there trying to hack you all the time. They want your email address, they want your phone number, they want your place of employment, and they want to do bad things with it. There's also fairly legitimate corporations and companies that want your information. They want it for marketing purposes. They're going to buy it. They're going to sell it. They're going to trade it. At the very least, it's annoying to you. It's a nuisance. It's aggravating. Your email gets cluttered up with spam email. You get robocalls all the time. That's at the very least. At the worst, it's a threat to your family, to your friends, to your personal information, to your banking, to your finances, to your security, to your safety, to your identity. It can be pretty serious. This video is sponsored by Aura. I got hacked, and it was pretty obvious. This was about 8 or 9 months ago, and there were red flags all over the place. And I didn't exactly know what to do, but I knew I needed to do something quickly. I mean quickly. I researched 8, 10, or 12 companies immediately. I went all over the place. I asked people. I was online looking for the best company that could serve my needs and secure my information. You know who I found? Aura. And I'm glad I did. It was amazing. I contacted them. They got right back to me immediately. Their customer support is phenomenal. Their customer service is first-rate, friendly. They are detailed, they know what they're doing, and they do it right, and they will protect you. In addition to everything I just mentioned, they've got a password keeping service. They keep your credit score. They notify you anytime there's a possible data breach. This has happened to me a number of times. I'm getting notifications all the time when there's a possible compromise to my credit score or anything that I don't want. They've got a VPN that will allow you to browse the internet anonymously. It's amazing. And again, customer service support available 24/7. Click the link in the description section below and get 2 free weeks of Aura. Protect your finances, protect your information, protect your privacy, protect your identity. I did, and I'm glad I did. Aura, thank you so much for what you've done for me, and now for my Voice of College Football community. And funny thing about the Aura sponsorship is that I had already used Aura, as I mentioned there in the spot there. So that was something that I came across about a year ago when I was investigating cybersecurity companies that they were the best that I could find. And then here, like a year later, they contacted me about a couple weeks ago and offered a sponsorship, not knowing that I was already using them. So that works well when you can sponsor something that you can fully invest in and say that I've used this and it works and it's great and the customer service is amazing and you can fully sponsor it. So that is a good thing. All right, OU Sooners Live, folks, here each and every week. Lock it in. Please subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications. The reason we let you know that we would like you to do that is to lock in on the shows to know when we go live, which we can't hit our mark each and every week. So we want you to be able to make it here for the show each and every week. So please subscribe and hit that bell. That turns on the notifications. You're only going to get one per week, so it's not going to drive you crazy. So, Jason, the transfer portal is still buzzing. Of course, it's shut down in regards to guys that are entering the portal on the last day of April. However, there's a ton of names in there, ton of players in there, and so we're going to be hearing news daily on guys making decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, Mark, around some of those guys that have put their name in the portal, Oklahoma has 3 that went in there last week. Nothing in terms of big contributors or guys that were even probably in line to get a lot of starting spot or significant playing time. But Colin Montgomery, offensive lineman, Jamarian Burt and Damon Harmon, both safeties in the back end of the secondary. So really with a lot of depth that Oklahoma has in the secondary, that wasn't a super big surprise. Colin Montgomery still hasn't really, he's got the body, but he's not really been able to kind of put that together. So not surprised with those 3, but those are the only 3 that I'm aware of that of guys that have hit the portal. There's 3 guys kind of note that, and there's probably more, but there's 3 guys that are kind of come to the forefront as guys that Oklahoma's in on. A couple of offensive linemen that were actually there for the spring game for Oklahoma. Josh Simmons, offensive lineman transfer from San Diego State, and Troy Everett, an offensive lineman from Appalachian State as well. So both of those kids from everything I've heard were really, really blown away by not only Bill Bedenbaugh, but the kind of the visit and everything around Oklahoma. And certainly you would expect that from kids that played both at App State and San Diego State as a mid-major team. And then I think we joked a little bit about this in terms of just the last week, just in terms of just the sheer amount of players being shuffling in and out of that Colorado Buffalo program right now. But there is one kid that Oklahoma has a really good opportunity on, and that's Jordan Tyson. He's will be a sophomore this year. Played in about 8 games last year, 22 catches for 470 yards and 4 touchdowns. But he was pretty significant in the last 3 games for Colorado. In just those 3 games, he had 13 catches for 344 yards and 2 touchdowns. So really came on at the last part of the year. I think there's a couple of hooks that Oklahoma has potentially with Tyson. He played high school ball with Michael Hawkins, who is committed to Oklahoma. So I think that's part of it. He comes through in Allen, Texas, which has previously been a pretty big pipeline for Oklahoma in terms of players. When you think of Kyler Murray came from Allen. When you think of Theo Weiss had come from Allen as well. So a pipeline that Oklahoma's still looking to tap. But I think you'll continue to see guys. Whether it's I think the offensive line and the wide receiver area are a couple of positions where there's probably some needed depth, some needed competition there. So whether it's any of these three kids or others that might kind of whet the appetite of the Oklahoma staff, so to speak, will be possible guys that Oklahoma could get. And as I mentioned, those are the two areas in terms of position groups that I think Oklahoma will attack more.
In the case of Josh Simmons, I've got Cleveland.com, Rivals, and 11 Warriors telling us that he has committed to Ohio State. However, if you go to 247 Sports, it's a crystal ball lean, but they don't have him posted as making that commitment. So
I had heard the same thing, Mark. I'd kind of heard the lean, but I hadn't heard officially committed to Ohio State. So we'll see. It looks probably likely a Buckeye, but we know how that goes. We still see flips in the transfer portal game as well.
No doubt. No flips in the NFL draft. You get drafted, and that's your destination. But that's a good thing because a lot of guys don't. Anton Harrison was the first Oklahoma player off the board, offensive tackle. You also had Wanye Morris, Marvin Mims drafted, running back Eric Gray, tight end Braden Willis, all found spots in the 23 NFL draft. Any particular thoughts about any of them and their careers at Oklahoma and then moving forward?
No, I think the one that, and certainly we can discuss all of them. I think Anton Harrison was the one that we knew at the beginning of this year that had probably the highest ceiling of anyone. I think there was some questions about his work ethic. I think there was some questions about his technique coming into this season, but I think he was really able to answer those. Was extremely improved this year. Always had the body type. I think he really killed it in terms of his in the combine. So was everything that I'd heard that potentially a lot of people thought probably an early second rounder, but he did make enough waves and enough moves to make it inside that first round. So I think he has an opportunity to be a good one. Wanye Morris again. Kind of the same situation, wasn't as successful in terms of kind of his consistency for Oklahoma this year, but did play a lot better. He was a guy that I think when a lot of people thought that would be when he transferred from Tennessee would be kind of an instant starter and kind of just a plug and play kid. It didn't necessarily always turn out to be that way. But no, I mean, good to see him get that opportunity. And then, I think what you look at from Marvin Mims is he always had the ability to take the top off the defense. And so I think that's maybe potentially where he can make the most waves, so to speak, at the next level. So excited to see him get an opportunity. Really, really smart kid. Just a good overall kid. And so just seeing him get that opportunity was really, really interesting. And so, and I think, just the offensive lineman, Mark, I think, Beatonbow locally, I think gets a little bit of grief early on these last couple of years as a guy that just not really at the same level. His offensive lineman hasn't been quite at the same level. So whether that's talent or whatever that is, however, I think this just proves he's continuing to put out NFL talent, and as a guy that's still one of the best offensive line coaches in the game.
Anton Harrison makes it a pick in the first round. So Oklahoma went 2 consecutive years, the 21 and 22 NFL drafts, without a first rounder. So what I notice here is with Harrison 1, Morris 2, Mims, Gray, and Willis make it 5. They're all offensive players. Does that tell us anything?
Yep. No, it does. And again, I think, and I don't remember the stat, Mark. There was something. I don't know if there's been consecutive years or how long that is, but anyway, again, it's another year Oklahoma still doesn't have any defensive players drafted. So it's a theme, and it's a bad one. And hopefully the staff could start turning that around. But yeah, no, that's a negative theme for sure.
We have talked much about the college football playoff. And before we get to that, just a couple of news and notes on the NFL draft again. And this is not of Oklahoma's concern since they are moving on to the SEC, but I was interested and am always interested to compare the conferences. SEC with 62 draft picks, Big Ten with 55. So for a 17th consecutive season, 17 consecutive NFL drafts, the SEC had the most. Now, the gap between them and number 2, which is almost always the Big Ten, not as wide as it typically is. So 62-55 is a pretty good indicator for the Big Ten that they're hanging in there. And also that the Big Ten had 4 more draft picks in the first 3 rounds than the SEC. They led the SEC 21-17 for those premium rounds 1, 2, and 3. They tied at 9-9 in the first round. And if you want to be technical about it, there was not 32 picks in the first round, and the 32nd pick went to the Big Ten. So they could have edged out the SEC for the first time in 17 or 18 years. But that all leads to also Oklahoma, Texas having 10 total picks. BYU had quite a few players, like 3. I think Houston had 4 or 5. So there might, in a sense, those 4 schools that are coming into the league, Cincinnati had some players taken off the board. I actually believe that the 4 schools that are coming into the Big 12 had as many draft picks as Oklahoma and Texas, 10-10, but not of the quality, number 1. And number 2, I think that's a pretty strong year out of those 4. And certainly Oklahoma, Texas not reaching their potential recently, Texas in particular, of NFL draft selections. So the Big 12 is going to take a hit, is what I'm trying to say, despite it being an even swap in the 23 draft of what they're losing versus what they're gaining. As for the Big 10, man, you look at the numbers between the Big 10 and the Pac-12 as it stands right now, and then you take USC and UCLA and their 8 selections that are only going to increase with USC continuing to build. You put those on the Big Ten's ledger and you take that away from the Pac-12, and wow, we are going toward a place, Jason, where the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have like 70, 75 draft selections, and the Big 12 is going to have 25, and the ACC is going to have in the 30s, and the Pac-12 might have in the low 20s. And that's going to be the disparity going forward.
Yeah, no, Mark, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's a very good point that you make, especially with the additions that both the SEC and the Big Ten are going to make. You would conceivably think that, I mean, I think it's logical to think that the UCLA, USC, Oklahoma, and Texas, the programs just in general, at some point over the next 5 years will elevate just with the sheer fact of being in the Big Ten are being in the SEC. We've talked about this a lot, Mark, in terms of some of those recruiting battles that Oklahoma and Texas, for that matter, that have been in with the SEC, and just having that SEC patch on your shoulder makes a world of difference. And I don't profess to know as much from a Pac-12 perspective, but with, to your point about the NFL draft here, and what the Big Ten has been able to do in terms of stockpiling a lot of this talent at the equal, or very close to at the equal of the SEC, you got to think that Big Ten patch might mean a little bit more, or start meaning a little bit more, just from an overall perspective for USC and UCLA. Now, that's a little bit different just from a geography perspective, right? USC and UCLA probably aren't typically, and maybe not in the future, are going to be battling a lot of these Big Ten teams in recruiting battles, right? It's still kind of West Coast dominated from a recruiting perspective, but still, I mean, it can do nothing but it will do nothing but help them. So yeah, I would, and I think as you think about conference realignment and what that looks like, I would be obviously nervous for Big 12 schools, right? Specifically some of those schools that have, relied on Oklahoma and Texas, so to speak, for carrying the conference, not necessarily every year, just in terms of winning the conference, but just from a brand perspective overall. Same with the Pac-12. So I would start to be a little bit nervous if I'm a Florida State fan, if I'm a Clemson fan, if I'm an Oregon fan, if I'm a Oklahoma State, TCU fan, from that perspective, that we're losing a lot, and what do we have to do to be able to kind of overcome some of that brand recognition that's not there anymore.
Absolutely. I'm running the numbers right this second, and if you redistribute based on what the conferences are going to be in 1 year, and you make all the moves with Oklahoma, Texas, USC, UCLA, and then the 4 coming into the Big 12, then you've got the SEC with 72, the Big 10 with 63, the ACC with 32, the Big 12 with 30, the Pac-12 with 19.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's very telling for sure.
And the top 3 rounds were even more of a wider gap than that, where the best players and the premium talent is. So it's something to track, and it's good for discussion. And speaking of which, it is a very connected topic to the college football playoff and what that's going to look like in terms of the teams involved and the conferences involved going forward. And here's the schedule. We talked about the NFL draft and how that reflects upon the conferences and how that's going to determine, and to a certain extent going to show up in the college football playoff. So Jason, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this, but to size it up, starting in 2024 with a 12-team playoff, you've got a game on Friday night. So that's a on-campus first-round game. And so this is 2 weeks after the conference championship games. And then a triple header that you would expect to be something like noon Eastern time, 3:30, 7 Eastern, something in that range.
Mm-hmm.
Triple header on Saturday. Then we come back with bowl games, the next go around, which is about 11 days later for New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And then semifinal games that are going to be played on Thursday and Friday, not on the same night as is currently the situation, but played on Thursday and Friday, thus avoiding the NFL playoffs, as you noticed there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the college football national championship game on a date that looks much like what a Super Bowl date used to be, January 20th.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, for me, it's exciting to just see this, right? I mean, and take it in, and just the fact that this is happening. I think taking a moment back, or taking a step back to know, okay, we've got one more year in the current system, but then in 2024, there's some um, just just a lot of excitement and the newness of having a 12-team playoff, and so that's the first thing. There's a lot of things that I like about this as I look through it. I love the fact, and we all knew this was going to happen. Love the fact of how all of the rotational bowls are being taken into consideration. They're all going to get a playoff game, which I think it's interesting. It's not going to be a bowl game in the traditional sense. I saw some conversations, and typically a lot of these bowl games will have some of the teams out there like 7 to 10 days before the game starts, and now it's just going to be like a typical playoff game where the teams show up a couple 2 or 3 days before the game as well. So a couple of like just kind of pinpointing some of the things that I like. I really, and this is me being a little bit more of a traditionalist. I really like that there's so many that we've got a few quarterfinal games on New Year's Day itself. That kind of goes back to traditionally, and you go back certainly in watching further than I. But I remember when a big majority of all of the games. All of the big bowl games were on New Year's Day. So I think I really like that. I really like the fact that they've given some of these teams a little bit more time in between games that you would normally see, not just as you mentioned, you've got one between either the 20th or the 21st. And then potentially they would come back 10 or 11 days later, and in most of those situations there's either anywhere from 8 to 10 days of time. So I really like that. I like how they've spread out the games, so to speak. And I think obviously for ratings, more so on the semifinal side more than anything, right? They want to have one game, one evening, and just so they're not, so eyes might not necessarily be divided between, kind of what, if you want to watch the game in the afternoon and you have plans in the evening or something like that. So, but I think the one thing that's a little concerning to me, and I don't know that there's any way around this in terms of the first round on campus games. And I think, and where I'm going with this, Mark, is specifically if we have teams like potentially Oklahoma in this general area. You've got Oklahoma, maybe if Nebraska gets better, Big Ten area, Midwest area, where weather could really become a big factor in some of these games. So that's the only thing that's, I mean, and I like the fact that the first round is on campus. I think that makes sense based on the format. It would be hard to incorporate a lot of these other bowl games into it, rotational New Year's Six bowl games. But that's the only thing that I think through is in terms of if weather at this, how important these games are, weather becoming a factor, and that could be unfortunate. And the last thing that I'll say, and as we think about going through just the amount of games that some of these teams will end up playing, at least right now, right? I mean, there could be, when you take into account a 12-game, regular season, and depending on if you get that first round bye or if you don't, you could have teams potentially playing in almost 17 games, 16, anywhere from between 15 and 17 games through a year. But I'm very interested to see what they do with week 0 moving forward. It might not be something that they do in the near term, meaning next year, the year after. But I've heard a lot of commentary about making week 0 essentially week 1 and moving the slate back 1 week so that you're not playing so deep into January.
Yeah, I would like that. I don't like stringing out the college football season for another month to a certain extent, although more football, most of us would agree, is a good thing. And I'm not necessarily saying that. I guess it just strikes me as a bit extreme to be playing a national championship game again on a date that up until just 10 years ago or so, when the NFL expanded its playoffs, was a date that you would see a Super Bowl played on. And yeah, I don't necessarily have huge issues with this in and of itself. Uh, there's a 2 week gap between the conference championship games and then these first round playoff games. I think that there's a slight disadvantage to anybody who makes a conference championship game and loses, so they don't get a bye, uh, and most likely are going to be traveling for a first round game. Uh, the other thing that comes to mind when you talk about the looking out for the players, and you alluded to this, is if you lose a conference championship game and you make it all the way to the national championship game, you will have played 17 games. So we see players opt out of bowl games now. So at one point, they only opted out of what a lot of people would consider meaningless bowl games or low tier bowl games. And then they started to increase in regards to the status of the bowl game to the point where they're opting out of any bowl games, Rose Bowl games, Sugar Bowl games, any non-playoff games. Well, don't know that a lot of people are thinking about the possibility that a player could look at a 4-game playoff run and think, do I want to play 4 more games? And if I don't play 4 more games, then we're not winning the national championship anyway. So either we're going to play 4 games and win a national championship or lose in the national championship game, or I'm not going to attain that goal anyway. So do I want to take the risk of playing 4 games? The other thing is it starts to make college football fans who like to travel and make a destination, it makes it impossible unless you've got all the time in the world and all the money in the world to make all these games, that you simply have to make a decision. Well, the difficult decision is, do you want to see your team play its second round playoff game on the road? Or shoot, I'm not even thinking about the teams that travel for the on-campus game. Do you want to experience going to another, we could pick out any school in the nation. Do we want to experience a December game at that location and get an on-campus feel, which is going to have its own level of excitement, but it's not going to be the destination of a New Orleans or Miami or LA or something like that? Or do we trust our team to win a game and then we'll catch up with them during the quarterfinals? And it's great to win a quarterfinal game, and that's amazing. You won the Rose Bowl, you got to the semifinals, but there's not that we just won it all, or we won at least a game that gets us to the national championship game. It's we won a first round game and we traveled and we spent money, and great, it was a first round game, but there's a whole lot more in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't get to like celebrate.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point that I knew, that was, even now, Mark, I mean, some of these fans are still trying to decide, okay, do I go to the semifinals or do I go to the national championship game, right? And then as you mentioned, it's even compounded much, much more here, right? So yeah, I think that's going to be an impact as well, especially those teams. Let's just say, for example, and I don't know if the logistics would even work out. Let's say Florida is traveling to, I'm just going to say they go to USC. They're playing USC in the Fiesta Bowl on Tuesday, December 31st. So that's a obviously that's a decent travel, for Florida, right? And then they turn around and they play in the Cotton Bowl. Now they got to travel, back, and then they're traveling back to Dallas area. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if issues are the right word, but there's a lot of, I think probably missed and missed opportunities in terms of kind of thinking about the fan impact for those. And the other thing is, like, some of these places that really, they don't always draw a ton of fans. Like, and I'm just using USC as an example. They're not always gonna fill that stadium up. I mean, you would think that if they're in a playoff game, that they would, but what do you, with those on campus games, if you have something like that, that will be interesting. And I'd like to get your feedback on this, Mark, just in terms, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the opt-outs. And if you're a player and you're going to be a high draft pick and you don't feel like, as an individual, that you've got much of a chance to go through, let's just say there's an individual from, let's just say, Tulane from this last year. They would have been, I believe they would have been the 12th seed, right? So they would have had to not only travel to that on-campus game, but go through 4 additional games to be able to play for a national championship. And so I wonder, just in terms of kind of wear and tear on the body, not only do you have that consideration of opting out for these playoff games, but do you have the consideration of, okay, we're playing, and I'm just going to throw out a name here. I mean, we're Tulane and we play an FCS opponent. Maybe it's the middle of the season. Maybe it's one of those situations where they're scheduling that in the middle of the season, or maybe a bottom feeder in the conference. Do some of these players and coaches alike say, okay, I'm gonna rest a couple of these kids during this game or these games so I can have them fresh, for the playoffs? Really going a little bit of a different direction, because right now in the playoffs, I mean, it's sort of every game is absolutely critical to win, to assure yourself that you're going to be in one of those top 4. And certainly we've seen teams that have been able to lose a game and make it back to that top 4. But now I think conceivably we could have some teams with, depending on the conference, 3, 4, maybe even 5 losses that could get hot at the end of the season and make the playoffs. And so every game doesn't matter quite as much on one side, but then on the other side you've got teams that typically year in and year out would be out of the conversation, and some of those games wouldn't matter as much down the stretch, and now they do matter. So that's an interesting, that will be interesting to see how individual players, coaches manage things like that.
If you take the 22 season and put it into the college football playoff expansion, this is what it would have looked like. Georgia, Michigan, Clemson, and Utah get the byes, which at first glance people sometimes think, what? They would get the byes? Yep, they would get the byes. Georgia, Michigan, obviously, but they all go to conference champions, and we had 2 non-conference champions, TCU and Ohio State, make the playoff. So they would not have received those 3 and 4 seeds. They would have gone to Clemson, who at that point was 11-2, and Utah, who was 10-3, would have received those byes, because your other conference champion is Kansas State, and they would have been 10-3 as well. But I'm just looking at the way the College Football Playoff Selection Committee ranked them. And so your first round games, we would have avoided ridiculously cold weather this particular time around. But to Jason's point, think of December 20th and 21st in Madison, Wisconsin, or Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or South Bend, Indiana, or a number of places. It could be interesting. In this particular season of 22, we would have had Tulane at TCU for a first round game. We would have had Penn State at Ohio State. I'm guessing the committee is going to massage rankings to try to avoid rematches that early. USC would have played at Alabama, and Kansas State would have played at Tennessee, which looked like really good games.
Yeah, and I think in this year, you're right, Mark. It would have been really good games, and I think you would also avoid a bit of the cold weather issues. I mean, you could potentially see that in Fort Worth, towards the end of December, but not any of the historic cold weather places like that. So, yeah, it's all exciting. Obviously, there's different things to take into consideration when you when you add a lengthy playoff here. So, but yeah, I mean there'll be tweaks obviously after this first year, and I think the one thing that's and to close on this, Mark, is I think the TV rights deal I think is going to be interesting to see. Not necessarily this year. I think ESPN holds the rights for the next couple of years, right? So all of these games, if I understand this correctly, I think all of these games will be televised by the ESPN family of networks over the next couple of years. But I think I think 2025 or 26 is when that deal is over. And I think there's been other places, other networks that have really strongly expressed the desire to kind of get into that mix. So I think that'll be something to look out for as well. Obviously it's going to create more revenue, certainly, but I think will be very interesting to see if to see who it is, if it's Fox or if it's CBS or whoever kind of gets in that mix to be able to host, not host, but the television rights for some of these games as well.
And I think we got a strong indication of that when the Big Ten signed with Fox, CBS, and NBC. And Kevin Warren made some statements, and he's no longer the Big Ten commissioner, but certainly speaking for the Big Ten. And I don't expect them to wander too far off of this philosophy that I don't know that they would have partnered up with those networks thinking that they wouldn't be most likely involved in the playoff. And there were comments that he and others made that, yes, that you're going to see more of an NFL style television network approach to the playoffs rather than just everything's on ESPN and that's it. Mm-hmm. Well, there's only 3 games. So now we're looking at 11 games, I believe is the total. Mm-hmm. And so expect, just like you see with the NFL, CBS, NBC, Fox, they're all involved. And even ESPN doing a wild card game, they're all involved in the NFL playoffs, that there's going to be a sharing of these games, most likely. And so, yeah, that's going to be another facet of this. Speaking of which, other debates here at the Voice of College Football as we are kicking off May as the Great Debate Month. And so we've got one lined up for tonight. We've got a contingent from the Pac-12. We got a contingent from the Big 12, and I'm going to moderate, and they're going to talk realignment. And certainly there are Pac-12 folks that believe that the TV rights deal is either going to be lucrative enough or not significant enough, meaning that the institutions and the academics themselves are binding these schools together more so than the athletics and the football, versus the other debate that, look at the Pac-12, they can't strike a media deal. They don't have any inventory. They don't have any scheduling opportunities, and it's going to be difficult for them to find a landing spot and to compete with the other conferences and make enough money. So shoot, they're going to see a number of schools leave. So that will be the debate tonight. So we're not going to solve anything. I'm going to tell you that. But we're going to do our best to differentiate at least facts from complete fantasy to, okay, we can draw some conclusions that are logical and have some level of possibility or probability of happening. So we will do our best tonight. All right, man. Anything else, Jason?
No, I don't think so. Transfer portal will be something to keep an eye on here for a while, but other than that, it's the in between spring and fall camp. So we'll see what happens.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here on OU Sooners Live. Please subscribe and turn on the notifications bell to know when we go live next week. And we will see you all back here next week for OU Sooners Live.